Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com, and today I'm going to be reviewing a session I played at 10:20 no limit. I played the session yesterday, and I was planning on recording right after, but some games popped up, so I wasn't able to. But the hands are definitely still fresh in my mind. I can definitely remember what I was thinking at the time. I chose the two table with no HUD, which is I usually play with no HUD, so it was a little more natural for me. And also I wanted to focus on kind of paying attention to the hands that I'm in and some of the hands I'm not involved in developing reads on some players. Here ace-5 suited, really standard call pre-flop. This is, I don't know, it's a good flop to make moves on just because, with a board like, let's say, Queen 7-3 Rainbow, you don't get as much credit when you make a move and you get through that bluffed a good amount, but with the flush draw, I think you get a little bit more credit, and they also have to fear you having a hand like ace-4 diamonds or 5-6 diamonds that you're going to shove over the top of a 3-bet bluff. So, though it is a good board to make moves on, I think that I'd rather just reserve those moves for times when I have a little bit more, a few more outs. Hands like 6-4, 6-5, even something like 10-8 of spades where there are a lot of turn cards that I can barrel on and have good equity. And then if I do hit on the river, it's very disguised. Even though, a hand like ace-5 suited clubs has more equity against his range, obviously, than like 6-5 when he bets. When he bets and calls a raise, or when he bets and 3-bets the flop, or anything like that, it's going to have less equity than a hand with some outs or backdoor outs. So I just decided to fold. Also, I'm not really sure if people at this table know who I am. I suspect they do, but I don't know it. I kind of wish, I'd prefer that they all knew who I was and I knew that they did, because I'd take some of the guesswork out of it. On full tilt, I'm a lot more confident people know who I am. I am going to be coughing throughout this video. I'm coming off cold. I feel fine, but I just have the lingering cough, and I'll try my hardest not to, but it's not going to work. I don't have reads on any of these players. You can see that GHTH I have a note on, but I don't know what that is. I guess I'll probably bring it up at some point. Dog 1-1. I've seen him, I believe, in Neiman's videos at 5'10", 6 max, and if he is who I'm thinking of, Neiman, I remember Neiman saying that he respected his game a lot and that he was a good, strong player. Other than that, though, readless. Deuces, obviously an open from any position. It's frustrating when you get 3-bet with hands like that, but as light as people are 3-betting these days, unless you know somebody's 3-betting a really tight range or plays really predictably post-flop in a certain way, you can't call with deuces or low pocket pairs. Just because you're not going to hit often enough, and when you do hit, you're not going to get their stack often enough because they're going to not have big hands. I guess that's kind of beginner stuff, but I'm sure some of you are beginners. Here on the left we have a pretty big pot, and I believe I go ahead and look back at this, so we'll talk through it then. Alright, so there's my note, is that he two-barreled Queen 4 deuce rainbow, king on the turn. He two-barreled into two people. I called the flop, and he bet the turn with no outs. Didn't bluff the river, I believe, but I don't remember the rest of the hand. Excuse me. Alright, so this hand. Also, I opened Queen Deuce off. This is not at all a standard open in the small blind. Definitely minus EV against most players, but I like to find out early in a match uh, how people are playing from the big blind. Some people are multi-tabling and just fold enough big blinds or fold enough flops that you can open most hands from the small blind, just given the price you get on your bluff. But most people that's not the case, but it doesn't cost me too much to find out. All right, so here, this previous hand, GHTH raises under the gun, gets calls by 1,000 air, and D-Rock 3-bets the button with Ace-3 offsuit. So that's interesting to note for sure. Not that I think it's bad. And here, I think there's a good chance I have the best hand. I was actually considering check calling some rivers, putting them on like 5-4, 5-7, 7-4 suited. The deuce improves me, but doesn't do all that much if he bets. I don't think I can value bet here, though. I only get called by, I guess, ace high, and more likely going to be called by a 6 or a king, or raised by 4-5, or raised by a bluff. Anyways, this hand, he squeezed under the gun raise and cut off call with ace-3 on the button, and then c-bet the flop and checked it down. I think you can learn a lot about somebody. Not necessarily draw a lot of conclusions, but start to gather some good information. The way I like to take notes is not to make conclusions. I don't see somebody make a play and type aggressive or a fish or bluffy. I like to take more specific notes, and then later I can make a decision on what that means. So a few things that are interesting about that 3-bet pre-flop that we have to decide which part later on is the most interesting, or what influences him the most. First of all, he squeezed. There's some people that are much more likely to 3-bet light when there's razor and a caller. Second of all, he was on the button and raised on the button. So it's, some people are, and I'll pause here, some people are much more likely to 3-bet in position than out of position. Some people go crazy on the button, a la David Benefield. And the other is that he raised an under the gun razor. He 3-bet an under the gun razor, and people I've found have very different tendencies with regards to that. Some people, especially people that have been around for a while, because this used to be the way everybody played, is people would never 3-bet under the gun razors light. And some people do it all the time. And then everything in between, obviously. So it's definitely important to note those three factors, or those three things that, that he raised with those three conditions. And, in future hands, if we see him 3-bet in one of those situations, or not 3-bet in one of those situations, we can maybe deduce which of those he values higher. So here on the right, I 3-bet with queens. 1,000 air min-raise the button. I'm going to assume that that's just his standard raise, either on the button or cutoff, or just from all positions. I see him on at least 2 tables, and I don't think that there are many regs that vary their raise size. So I'm not going to read too much into his hand strength from his button min-raise. I think, he can min-raise the button with all the hands that... what I'm saying is I don't necessarily interpret that as weakness or strength, just that's his raise. I 3-bet queens and flop middle set. I have obviously 2 options right now, bet or check. I think that slow playing in this spot is fine, and I probably do it maybe 20% if I had to put a number on it. But I think people slow play too much and don't really think about the ways the hand can play out. Really, if you slow play this board, you're looking to get him to 3-barrel bluff, or 3-barrel for value with a hand worse than yours that would likely have paid you off or gotten the money in on the flop return if you bet yourself. So really all you're hoping to do is let him improve to his second best hand, or get him to bluff you. And the other important thing is you protect your checking range with your hands like 10s that want to check here. The problem is some people check here, call a flop bet, and then the turn is like a 7. Their opponent bets small, and they check raise. And now any competent opponent, assuming that you don't have a history or they don't have a strong read on you, is going to say, okay, well, Mr. Sweet's check called the flop. That means he has showdown value, obviously. Probably a hand like jacks or tens, maybe kings, maybe king queen, potentially slow playing a big hand. Very unlikely that he's check calling with like a king jack out of position. Possible, but really unlikely. Now the turn's a 7, or whatever I said, and Mr. Sweet's check raises. Okay, well, he's obviously not check raising with kings, or king queen, or jacks, so all of those hands are out of his range, so I think he's definitely slow playing something big, or very likely to be slow playing something big here. And I think he'll make a lot of big folds there if he's competent, so definitely slow playing is an important part of poker, and a huge part of my game, but you have to have a plan, and you have to realize the ways that the hand can play out. I think people too often check to induce. They're just checking. They're not really sure what they're trying to induce. They're just checking to disguise their hand and then taking it from there. When you really have to think about the ways that the hand's going to work out. Most of the time, you're not going to get 2 or 3 bets by checking here. Though some of the time you will. But it's just when you want to spring into action on later streets, it costs you a lot, or it gives away your hand strength. That is. Against a weaker player, all that goes out the window, obviously. But I assume Thousander's a good player. I like to bet here most of the time. First of all, this is a board I'd bet with all of my random junk, or most of it, besides the times that I do something spewy like check call or check raise with air. Excuse me. I'm going to keep coughing and probably keep saying excuse me because I can't help it. Here on the turn, I just don't think that... Alright, so he could be floating with like King Jack, King 10, Jack 10. I think, though, that King Jack and King 10 might check behind the turn. And Jack 10 here is going to be shoving anyways if I bet. And might be checking behind if I check. So, unless he has like a hand like 4-5, I'm not really doing myself any favors by checking. It doesn't really help against any of his range. Besides 4-5. Anything that he's going to, value bet too thinly, he's likely going to get in, or at least call when I bet, and potentially call the river. So I think a bet here again is standard. Obviously, snap, call, shove. And win the hand. So, not too interesting a hand, just I played it the most standard way possible, but I still think the notes I had about reasons on slow playing and your options are worth paying attention to. He had King 10 of diamonds, which I actually think he played entirely standardly. I guess he probably feels like he spewed a little bit or something, but people would look at that and think somebody bluffed off their stack, but I don't think there's any other way to play it, really. Here I 3-bet with ace-5 offsuit. This is not a play that I make regularly. I'm actually more inclined to make it given the last hand for a few reasons. First of all, I think that he... obviously this is all guesswork, but I think that he will think that I'd expect him to be tilting. So I think he's thinking that Mr. Sweets is not going to be messing around with him here, and will not give him credit if he 4-bets, things like that. So he's got to put me on a pretty strong range, I think. When in actuality, I don't really think it's that likely that he's tilting. He's a multi-tabler. He just lost 1 buy-in. That happens multiple times a day to him, I'm sure. So I don't think it affected him too much. That's one factor, is that I think that he'll expect to be perceived as tilted when he in fact isn't. And the other factor is that I think that even though, as I said, his hand with the King 10 suited was entirely standard, he still semi-bluffed off a stack with King high. And though logically he knows that play was fine, it psychologically, emotionally, I think makes people feel a little bit like they made a mistake or did something stupid. Even though if you asked him directly, did you do something stupid, he would say, no, that was standard. It still gives you a feeling of like messing up. Um, and when people kind of put chips in the pot, force chips in the pot and mess up, I think it makes them doubt themselves a little uncertain. And I think that they're much less likely to make another move right after then. So I guess this could be its own video, this discussion right here, but I'll end it right there. But I do think that he's going to be a little less likely to make a move here, either by 4-betting pre-flop or by calling. He might call a little bit late, but then I wouldn't expect him to go crazy on flops. And this play in a vacuum I think is fine. Probably plus EV, but I don't do that often because then it becomes minus EV if you're 3-betting 70% or 60% of buttons against somebody who notices. So I'm looking for other hands against him, or played by him, just to see, learn whatever I can about him. He does 4-bet. And, I don't know if he actually is tilted or is 4-betting light, but I'm pretty confident actually that he's not 4-betting light here. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, am I going to talk myself into doing something here? But no, I decided to stick with the way I felt because I think it was right that he wasn't tilted and was less likely to make a move there than normal. Here on the left with sixes, this isn't a board I think that people c-bet with, like, I don't know, let's say ace-4 spades. Maybe people do, but I don't usually, and I think people shouldn't be all that often. Just because it's too likely to hit me, too likely I'll play back if it didn't hit me, things like that. And even against a hand like, let's say, ace-jack, he has 6 outs. He can make me fold a lot of turns. There aren't really many turns that help me besides 2 sixes. One of them's a diamond. And, I'm either drawing 2 outs or I'm going to fold the best hand some of the time, or I'm ahead by not that much. So I think that's just a fold. Ace-9 offsuit I raise from the cutoff until I get a reason not to. With loose aggressive players behind me, it turns into a fold for me. So here on the left I open 9s from the cutoff. And look at my note on him, doesn't give me anything relevant. And I'm looking through hands, but I don't really see anything. So, readless, essentially, I think the best play here is to 4-bet and call it off if he shoves. I definitely don't want him to shove. I think that I'm behind his shoving range by a little bit, assuming he's somewhat sane. But I think he folds often enough, which he did. And the alternative of calling and seeing a flop, 9s is not a hand that plays that well out of position in a re-raise pot. If you don't flop a set, there are almost definitely going to be overs on the flop. If there aren't overs on the flop, it's tough to get check raise on the flop and get it in, though that'd likely be what I'd do if there weren't overs. And, I'd get it in bad a good amount of the time. If there is like one over, like King 5 deuce, and I check call, and then the turn's a jack, and I check and he bets. Or it goes check, check, and he bets the river. Essentially, there are a lot of ways that I get bluffed off the best hand. Not many flops that I can... No flops I can really semi-bluff with. Basically, the only way I'm going to win the hand is by taking the best hand to showdown most of the time. And it's not going to happen often enough. That said, I think that calling 9s there is more profitable than folding. But I think 3-betting is just better. It's not a great spot to be calling pre-flop there. In position, I would always, well, not always call. I would usually call. It's also definitely important to be able to be 4-bet calling in the cutoff against a button 3-better, because 3-betting in position is such a powerful weapon, and you have to be able to counter it otherwise. People can just 3-bet you to death, and you do want to be able to 4-bet bluff a good amount, so you need to have all those 4-bet calling hands in your range. So here he bets into me on 8-6 deuce, And I likely have the best hand, but it's going to be a tough board for me to call down on if he bets again on the turn. There aren't many turns that help me, basically only an ace or a jack, and a couple of them are clubs. Not that I would fold a jack of clubs turn, but, you know, it's not ideal. I think all three options are okay here. Raising, calling, or folding. I ended up raising, and the reason I did is because I think this is a board that I'll get a lot of credit on. And, I do have 6 outs, and they are 6 outs that are, well, at least 4 of them are not super obvious ones. And then there are outs that I could hit, like a 10 or a 9 or a club, ones that I can rep if he calls. And it's also not a board that he's going to be 3-bet bluffing, I think. A lot of people will say when they raise here, well, I probably have the best hand, but that's things like that are kind of a pet peeve of mine because, I mean, it's completely irrelevant that you have the best hand most of the time because when they call or when they raise, the fact that you have the best hand against their betting range doesn't matter at all anymore. Might as well have, 5 high, just because you're essentially, I mean, not never, but almost never getting a showdown with your ace high and winning. And a lot of, you're not like getting it in on the flop if they 3-bet you. So I took a note on him that he might c-bet too often on boards that are bad to c-bet on. He c-bet snap folded that one, which is not an ideal board to c-bet. And then he did c-bet the 10-9-3 2-diamond board earlier, which, we don't know that he had air. But it's a pretty bad board to c-bet, so there's a reasonable probability that he was c-betting with a hand that in my opinion he shouldn't have been. I open ace-6 offsuit here in the cutoff. That's not a standard open for me. I think it's at some tables it's profitable, but at many it's not. But this table hasn't proven to be super aggressive. I guess I have been 3-bet in position once, but anyways, they folded, so it was right. Here on the right, I take a note that tell a friend open limped from the hijack. I guess I didn't say from the hijack. And then I went through some hand histories to look for other things that he's done, see if he open limp before. And there's a hand where he 3-bet from excuse me, from 60 to 140 and c-bet and took it down. But those are two things that are important to note. And like I said before, I don't look at those two things and just take a note that says fish. Or, if I were on full tilt, give him like a whatever color code. Just because I don't think that helps me that much. First of all, I'm not positive he's a fish. It's pretty likely, but who knows? He could just be an unusual pre-flop player. Or be trying to give the image that he is a fish. And the other thing is there are all different kinds of fish, and I don't know what kind of fish he necessarily is. If I just write fish, some fish bluff off their stacks all the time. Some fish fold every hand. Some fish just check call all the time. Never, I don't know. I could list different types of fish all day. But the point is, I think specific notes are important, and then later on, the more I learn, I'll take more notes and be able to give like a good description of the way he plays, and hopefully the way he thinks. That's really the goal. Not sure what I'm looking for here. I guess I was seeing if this player FZIEN has been short stacked the whole time. If he bought in short stacked, if he made any fishy plays. Usually somebody with a half stack I'll assume is a weaker player, but I definitely want to get more evidence to confirm it. I briefly consider 3-betting with Jack 3 suited there, but it's too weak a hand. And D-Rock has shown that, he's capable of mixing it up. dog min raises the button. I have not been paying attention, but I'm going to assume also that that's a standard raise. I click the auto call pre-flop because I occasionally do that with like 6-3 suited, and I wanted to balance by doing it with a stronger hand. But don't worry about that. Here, I check all the flop. I have a couple backdoor straight draws and backdoor flush draw. I also have ace high, which is likely the best hand, and there is a good chance that it'll go check, 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 check after that. So, the fact that I have the best hand sometimes matters. And now he bets, somewhat small, but not a tiny bet on the turn. This is one of those spots where you don't really know what level somebody's on, because level 1, this is a bad board to bluff. Back in the day, if you're playing a fish, you don't bluff this board because any pair that they have, it's less likely that you have a king now, so they're just going to call with their 5 or their deuce or whatever. And it's very possible that they have a king, which they're obviously not folding. But level 2, I know that. Level 3, he knows I know that, etc., etc. I don't really know anything about his tendencies here. I think there's a good chance that he could be betting twice with a hand like sevens to get value from my 5 or my deuce, just because I think he thinks I'll probably call with them. There's a reasonable chance he's bluffing, but I don't think it's super, super likely. Just because even though the second level, or fourth level, whichever you want to call it, thing of, people know that this is a bluffable board, the fact of the matter is, or is not a bluffable board, the fact of the matter is it's just not a bluffable board. It's too likely that I'll show up with a king. It's harder for him to have a king, hand combos-wise, so he should expect me to call a decent amount of the time. So I just don't think people bluff it that often, which I think is somewhat correct. Anyways, I'll tell you what I decided to do. I decided to check raise, and I actually don't like that play, looking at it now. The problem is, I called a min raise in the big blind, so my hand range is super wide. Sorry. I check call the flop, which pretty much means I can have any gutter on this board. Some of them, I guess I would fold like 6-3 offsuit, maybe 6-4 offsuit. Otherwise, though, I can have all the gutters. Occasionally, like the suited ones, 3-4 suited, ace-3, ace-4. Though I'd probably call to turn with those, not check raise. But it's the kind of board where I think I can have a lot of air. Like I am not repping a hand very well here when I check raise, but it's not the kind of board where it's obvious that I'm not repping much, so he should think that I know that and I'm not going to be bluffing. I think it's the kind of board where if he thinks about it a little bit, he'll realize I'm not repping much, but at the same time, it's not such a super obvious spot that he should think I'm not going to, I wouldn't be bold enough to try it. I'm going to confuse myself with leveling, so I'm going to stop there. But I did decide to check raise. I didn't really like a check call just because I just didn't think it was likely enough that he was bluffing. And, to defend my play, there are 2 kings left, so it's pretty, less likely as a king. Could be bluffing some of the time, so I take him off his bluffs that are not big semi-bluffs. And if he does have a hand like 6s or 7s or ace-5 or whatever, I do have outs and a good chance to get him to fold on the turn. That said, I still don't like it. Just giving you my reasons for the play. He does decide to fold, so I look cool in the video, but I don't really think that was a good play by me. Um, that's kind of interesting. I think I should have taken a note on him regarding that hand. And I don't really know what I could learn from it yet, but it seems like he was betting a hand there either for value or like a pretty something with showdown value or semi bluff, and then but that wasn't super strong, and then decided to fold. So that's a note I should have taken. Jack 8 offsuit, I think is an open in the button in most games, but there are definitely games these days that is not an open in. So I flop a jack high flush draw, no pair, and I think the flop could go either way. I'm really fine with whatever. I probably bet more often than I check here. No, it's probably pretty close. I just think that you do get a decent amount of folds, but they're from hands that you're either ahead of or will get to fold on the turn. Get folds from on the turn anyways. You do get check raised occasionally and fold a hand with outs, or the best hand sometimes. So I'd rather just see a turn, maybe hit a heart, and kind of gauge where I am from there. Hit a jack or an 8, which I do here on the turn. Gauge where I am from there. So he checks to me, and I'm debating whether or not to bet. And I go back and forth and decide to bet. And I actually don't like this play again. Alright, well, here, I'll play back for a little bit. He check raises. I just want to show you that, so you didn't listen to all my analysis and then get mad that I was potentially being results-oriented. So maybe this is results-oriented, but I really do not like my turn bet. Essentially, there aren't many hands that I'm getting value from. And there aren't many hands that I am, I'm not bluffing them off the best hand ever. At the time I was thinking, and this could be a little, because I play mostly heads up, short-handed, in games where, people have hands like 9-7 offsuit here with the 9 of hearts that can check all the turn. Or, yeah, I guess just a lot of hands like that. Ace-7 offsuit. I guess Ace-7 suited, which he could have. But basically, if he calls, he's going to have a king. Or, sorry, if he doesn't fold, he's going to have a king, he's going to have a flush, he's going to have a jack, which is better than mine. And very, very rarely he's going to have, like, 8-7 of spades. But that's pretty rare. I think, there's some merit to protecting against, like, Ace-10 of spades or something, but I'm in pretty good shape against that hand. I'm not too worried. And essentially I just think that, I'm ahead most of the time, but he's not calling with worse. And there's not much I need to protect from. And there is obviously the risk of this check raise. Essentially just because he's playing mostly, like high card hands or suited hands or pocket pairs in this spot. So, I guess I can get a call from, like, pocket 8s or pocket 9s with a heart. But basically, I'm not getting called by many worse hands, and I'd rather just check this down, have a pretty relatively strong hand in my range there to check twice, and, make a decision on the river. But this was, I think, a careless bet by me. I was being lazy. And now that he's check raised, until proven otherwise, I'm just going to assume that most people don't take this line as a bluff that often. Even though I look somewhat weak, I just don't feel like they're going to be bluffing often enough. And if they aren't bluffing, my jack, my two pair outs, sorry, my two pair outs probably aren't live, and my jack of hearts might not be live. So. Or probably isn't again. So I think that's just a fold. and a bad bet by me. I'm surprised I'm making this many mistakes. Alright, so here on the left, I call a raise on the button. Thousandaire min raises, and D-Rock calls. I decided to call. You know, Ace-Jack's not a hand you want to be getting 4-bet there with, just because it's too weak to get it in, too strong to be happy about folding. It just plays better this way, in my opinion. A 4-way flop. Pre-flop raiser checks, and D-Rock bets. I give him a pretty strong range in this spot, but I have top pair, jack kicker, ace of clubs as a backup. And so I think I have to call at least once and take it from there. I don't know a ton about him, but you know, I think he has to assume that Thousandaire is going to be folding a decent amount of the time there, and that the shorter stack in the big blind likely is calling with a ton of preflop hands, so he's probably folding. So this isn't really a bad spot to bluff if you're D-Rock. The short stack calls after I call, and now we have an interesting spot on the turn where I have I'm 2200 deep effective with D-Rock and 900 deep with F-Zine, and they check to me. I think it's pretty likely I have the best hand here, but I don't see, unless F-Zine is a big fish, which he potentially could be, but I'm not really sure. I don't see myself getting a lot of value here, or getting a lot of credit for bluffing. There aren't, that's not a flop that I would expect them to expect me to float with a hand like Queen Jack, or any other kind of float, for that matter. And if I did have a hand like, let's say, Jack 9 of clubs, for instance, I don't think they would expect me to bet it here on the turn, given that F-Zine can shove, you know, any of his flush draws, or Ace X, who knows. And then I'm forced to fold my 9-outer, potentially. Or, you know, possibly the best hand, though really, really unlikely. If he had a lower flush draw, that is. But, you know, he could have like an 8-6 of clubs. Anyways, since I don't think I'm getting much value, and if I am check raised by either of them, I really don't know what to do, and I'm pretty unhappy with myself. I decided to check behind here. Not that I think either of them check raising is likely at all, but I just didn't think they were going to be calling that much. So river's pretty much a brick. Anything that called the flop shouldn't have like a 6-4 or 6-9. And I'll pause here. On the left, I am pretty confident I have the best hand. I'm going to give a short stack less credit for check shoving the river here. With like a set or something. I expect him to either get that in on the flop or just bet the river with it. And I don't think D-Rock's going to be check raising second to last to act there. He certainly could be, but I think he would bet the turn usually with most of his hands that can check raise. So I decided to bet, you know, hopefully just get a call out of either, you know, if short stack is a fish, then get a call from whatever he has, maybe even a king. And, you know, maybe D-Rock looks me up with a worse ace or just gets really suspicious. It's definitely possible that I would have a hand like Jack 10 of clubs here. On the right, I get 3-bet. I raised under the gun with jacks and get 3-bet by a player that I don't know much about other than he c-bets too much. Or potentially c-bets too much. Basically no read. And it's kind of a gross spot because this isn't a spot where he's going to be 3-betting with 10s or 9s and then getting it in. He basically either has ace-king, possibly ace-queen, probably not, or queens, kings, aces, or some kind of trashy hand, suited connector, suited junk, 8-7 off, whatever. So while this is actually an okay spot to 4-bet light, I don't think it's a good spot to 4-bet with jacks. Just because most of the hands that I'm going to get to fold. I actually have great equity against, like 80% equity against, and we'll get a C bet out of him. And I kind of trust myself to be able to maneuver post flop. And if I do get it in, I think I'm going to be fairly far behind his range. I don't even think he has ace queen all that often, so I think I'm looking at ace king and queens plus, or his air hands, which I think he has a decent amount of air, but not that doesn't matter so much because I think I play well against his air post flop, or well enough. Not a great flop for me, and I actually expect him to be c betting a lot there. This is a pretty important part of the hand. When he checks back this flop, again, I think I've already said this, but big disclaimer: good players are capable of mixing things up, and my assumptions on these like unknown 10-20 players is that they're pretty good, but not going to be making any super advanced, highly complex, tricky plays. So what that means is I'm going to assume that if he has a hand like 10-7 of hearts, he's not going to check it back almost ever here on the flop. So what I assume here when he checks back, and obviously there are players that will do that and then bluff later in the hand, and you got to learn who those players are and adjust accordingly. Anyways, given that assumption for an unknown 10-20 player, I don't think that he is checking back air often at all. I think his check back hands consist of occasionally kings or aces, pretty rare though, I think. Queens, could have been maybe jacks, but now it's impossible. And then a lot of his random, like 10-6 suited, ace-5 suited, things like that flopped a pair. I think that's going to be, I think 95, I think I would feel comfortable saying 95% of his check back range here, or 95% of the check back range against an unknown 10-20 regular here consists of, or sorry, at least ace queen high. He could have ace queen. So at least ace high. So some showdown value. So now how do I play the turn? I think against that range, I need to bet because and I actually go ahead and check, which I'm unhappy with. I remember at the time I was planning on getting him to bet with like, I don't know, potentially a hand like king 7 suited that check back for pot control, and then he would bet and I would jam and look like a big draw or something. But a hand like king 7 suited is going to call the turn and potentially call the river anyways. So I don't get that much more value by checking against that hand. And against his hands like, let's say like 10-6 and against queens, I do much better by betting. 10-6 is never going to bet here on the turn, or almost never going to bet. And queens potentially could bet, but then it's another one of those spots where what's my plan? I guess I could jam against queens and they'd fold almost definitely, I think. Or I could make a small raise and they'd probably fold, or I call to slow play, but I don't think he's going to value bet the river with queens, or most people wouldn't. Or I don't think most people would, is what I meant. So I really hate my check here. And kind of immediately regretted it too. So queen on the river does improve the one-hand queens, but I still think it's likely enough that he did have a hand like king 7 or maybe ace queen, hopefully, potentially like a 10-6, hopefully a hand like queen 6 or something random like that. So I think I can put in a value bet here. I don't expect him to bluff just because I don't expect him to have air. A lot of people, one of the reasons to slow play is to induce a bluff, and usually that's the main reason. So if you are trying to induce a bluff, make sure that your opponent has some air in his range. This isn't a spot where I think he has much air on the turn or river, so I think inducing a bluff is bad. So I go ahead and make a pretty normal size bet. He thinks for a little while. makes a pretty big raise. This is, I mean, it's kind of a gross spot, but, um, I mean, as you can see here, if I play it out, I just pretty quickly folded. I don't really think that... I think I'm up against the bluff there maybe 10% of the time against an unknown. And I think that I would take 1-to-1 that he had queens. I would bet that he had queens. I think it's more than 50% likely that his exact hand was pocket queens there. Just because I think that he doesn't get to the river with 10-9. He bets before then. Ace-10 I don't think is 3-betting pre-flop. If it does, I think it usually bets the flop, potentially bets the turn, not always. But just doesn't, is possible but unlikely. And then he's not value raising a hand worse than mine. He didn't slow play 6s or 5s or 3-bet them pre-flop. Queen Jack I don't think he'd value raise. Though it's somewhat possible. I think he would just bet the flop with that hand. And King Queen he would bet the flop or the turn with, so that's not possible. Hands like Queen 6 or Queen 5 are possible, but I just don't think he'd raise them on the 3 straight board with 3 high cards when I raise called under the gun. So I'm pretty confident he had exactly queens there, or fairly confident. And maybe I'm wrong. Smitty, if you are a Blue Fire member, I'd love for you to tell me you had queens. But if you did not have queens, then just pretend you're not a Blue Fire member and don't respond. A lot of people get caught up there, though, in absolute hand strength, where, I had third set, but all I beat was a bluff. And this is actually a good stopping point, I think, for the video. I guess we're almost 50 minutes in. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and definitely looking for more feedback as far as really anything. It's no harder for me to make a 2-tabling video than a 4-tabling video, or a 10-20 video than a $2, $4 video. So just let me know, or PLO or no limit video. I know that the PLO no limit thing is going to be pretty much based on what you play, and we do have more members that play no limit than PLO, but I've been mixing it up, and I'll continue to. And things like HUD, no HUD, any suggestions we're really open to, myself and all the other pros. So post in the video comments or wherever you see fit. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.